お待たせいたしました。これよりメドピアトラックでは Vue Vite Nuxt Core Team Member Anthony Fu 様によるセッション Anthony's Road to Open Source Yak Shaving をお届けします。本セッションでは AI 英語教材 ABC 動を開発、個人の可能性を最大化する株式会社グロービー様の提供により、英語から日本語への同時通訳をご利用いただけます。ご希望の方はお席に置いてある受信機をお使いください。なお、受信機はセッションが終了しましたら、本トラックの外には持ち出さず、そのまま席に置いてくださるようお願いいたします。また、Vue Fes Japan 2024では4つのトラックを同時進行しております。このメドピアトラックについては、ハッシュタグ、viewfes_メドピアでどんどん感想を共有してください。では、Mr. Fu, are you ready?
ありがとうございます。
それでは皆様、どうぞ温かい拍手でお迎えください。
はい、皆さんこんばんは。まだ会えてきて嬉しいです。この素晴らしいイベントに再び招待していただきありがとうございます。スタッフの皆さん、ここまでお疲れ様でした。ちなみに僕は最近日本語を本気で勉強し始めまして、またよろしくお願いします。Yeah, it's good to meet you again, and thanks for having me here. So let me introduce myself quickly. My name is Anthony Fu, and I'm the core team member of Vue, Vite, and Nuxt. I'm also the creator of Vite, like the Nuxt and a few other open source projects. I'm currently at Nuxt Lab on the framework team, so you can find me on the social media with the links below. So today I'd like to talk about open source again. It is my own journey with open source. Like I mentioned last year, open source is a very big topic, and so I break it into a series of talks. And today's topic is the third one. It's called Yak Shaving. So 少し難しいですが、とりあえず訳総理と呼びたいです。I hope it makes sense, and I will explain. So the series is about open source, consists with multiple parts. And part one is the set theory, which I gave last year, and the second one is called the progressive path. Maybe someday I can do it again in Japan. In the meantime, you can always find the slides and the recordings on my previous talk and of my previous talk on my website. So back to our topic today. So what is yak shaving? It seems to be pretty random, right? So let's break it down and see how it's explained. So if you look up the dictionary, yak is a type of cattle that has a long hair and long horns. That I don't know how to pronounce the kanji in Japanese though. And shaving means that's removing hair from body. Combining those two together, it still doesn't make sense. It doesn't explain that much. And here is the illustration by David that gives you the impression of like what yak shaving means on literal. And so I hope I didn't make you more confusing. So yak shaving is actually a term that we use to describe a phenomenon in the tech world or our daily life. Let me give you some example. So let's say today we want to build a blog. And after some research, after some searching, we find that existing tool doesn't quite meet our need. So we decide to create our own static site generator. And so after spending half a month building it, we realized that, okay, the front-end framework doesn't work well with our generator. So we decide to invent a new framework, maybe the new Vue. And another month passed, we realized, okay, we need routing, state management, IDE plugins, dev tools, and a lot more. And 2 years later, you spend 2 years of building on those things, and you find somehow you are like shaving the yak in Tibet. But what? Where's your blog? Right. So this is just an example we mentioned earlier. So the term yak shaving refers to a series of tests chain that triggers in the process of solving a problem and resulting in deviation from your original goal. This term usually carries the negative connotations. Is often used to educate people to stay focused on their goal and to not lose the endless details. So this term is also have a similar saying called down to the rabbit hole. So although this term is usually used in a negative sense, what if we consider from another perspective? What if we are able to accomplish all those things we mentioned? Wouldn't we just potentially come up with a complete new solution like Vue, like how Vue did in the past? Of course, we know that those things have a considerable level of complexity, and it's impossible to complete them with our own in a shorter period of time. It's easy to get lost in the process and eventually giving up. So this is a charm of like open source coming in. If the solution you provide is completing enough, you may receive help from the other more people in the open source community, hustling the power of the community to create a complete ecosystem, transforming Yak Shaving into a positive and proactive process. So let's analyze how we can effectively utilize Yak Shaving to come up with a suitable idea for open source project. I would say that Yak Shaving can be a good way to generating ideas and provide a strong motivation. From the perspective of needs, because the Yak hair coming from the problems we encounter ourselves, starting from our own needs allows us to have a deeper understanding of what's the problem and the potential solution. And our motivation of shaving this yak comes by solving our own problem and possibly helping the others. Furthermore, our needs are likely to be shared by the others, and if we can validate our ideas through the open source project, through the open source community. Finally, through the community discussion and contributions, we can iterate our design and improve our solution. So by following this approach, we can gather the essential elements for continuous development of the open source project that we are skilled at and enjoying and what the community needs. This approach is much more practical than trying to guess what kind of project can be successful or what kind of things that people might need. So let's talk about some real-world example and how it works in the business world. So we know Shopify at the very beginning is actually starting by selling snowboard. At some points, they want to scaling up their business, so they're starting to build an online store to sell more snowboard. While they're building the store themselves, they find out that they can actually, this is very common need for the other kind of stores, which they end up building an e-commerce store platform that we know today. And we also have Epic Games. They first starting by trying to make a 3D game, and then they find out that 3D games are really hard to make. So they decide to make an engine first to make things easier. And now the engine is called Unreal Engine. That's now they are licensing the engine to the other game developers. So similarly, we have Amazon that's first starting working on their infrastructure to support their stores and then end up with having AWS, which becomes the right now the Amazon's the largest revenue source today. So then we have Slack. They're first working on a game, and eventually the game failed. But during the process of making a game, they have their internal communication app, which now becomes the main business, and then they sell into the enterprise. So let's go back to open source. Here, I would like to briefly outline what I personally consider the process of generating open source tools, ideas, and their implementation to use the concept of Yak Shaving. So when we encounter a problem, the first step to take is to take some time to consider the problem and consider the possible solutions. Think about whether it can be a general solution or it might have, the others might also have encountered. Then we can search for if there's an existing library in the market, following the principle of like do less work if possible. And the best is that you don't need to do it at all. And it's best to reuse the existing solutions. At the same time, you can contribute to open source by providing feedback and suggestions to improving the existing solutions. But if you cannot find the existing tool that meets your expectation, or if the existing tool doesn't fit your needs, but it could be a general solution. So then congrats, you have a valid idea. At this point, you can start to implementing your tools by first creating an MPV, minimum viable product, to validate if it's feasible of your idea. When designing, keep in mind that idea of decoupling the interface for future extension. The key is to avoid the yak shaving trap, is to go back in time. You don't need to make it perfect. You just need to have it meet your current need. And the important thing is to return your main text in a timely manner, and then you can refine details of your tools later. Assuming we have completed our main text and have some extra time, and if you go back and still being interested in the tool, you can extract it to a separate library. Write a brief documentation, explain your motivation, why you're creating the tool, and then open source the repository. Once all is done, you can then promote your repositories properly. Share it with your colleague, post it on the social media, and so on. It'll help you to gather feedback from the community and understand the pros and the cons of your solution. So I highly encourage you to write a technical blog post to summarizing your journey during the process, what you research, what you find, and what have you tried, to share the problem you have encountered, the solution you propose, and the license you learn. It's not only for introducing your tool to the others, but it also serves as a valuable technical resources. Even people don't directly use your tools, they can also learn from your explorations. Even in the worst scenario, if the idea is ultimately proven to be unfeasible, the blog post can still be valuable explorations, just like an academic paper. If the failure of valid hypothesis is also an important contribution. So in the end, we can use the open source community to validate the generality of our solution. If our project doesn't get much attention in the end, that is okay. Lower our expectation, at least we solve our own problem, summarize the solution, and gain the valuable experience. But if the tool is fortunate enough to be embraced by the community, we'll naturally receive notifications from the GitHub to indicating, oh, people starting to contributing. And at this point, you can start to discuss with the community and accept the feedback, fixing the bug, and adding new features, and so on. Throughout this process, you will find that your tools becomes more refined, and while helping the others, and eventually will also benefit the tools that's of yourself. So that said, here I'd like to share my journey of yak shaving for you to reference and hope to bring you some inspiration. So my journey open source started with a project built on Nuxt called Breath Split around 5 years ago. An app that's to manage shared wallet. At that point, we want to do internationalization, IATN. But I find that there's no good tools for managing translations in VS Code. So I made this extension called IATN Alley to improve the experience on VS Code. From this project, also from this Breath Split project, I extracted the composable use internally to become Vue use. And at that time, Vue 3 was not yet ready, and the community still hesitated about if the new composition API is good or not. So I was trying to make Vue use to work on both Vue 2 and 3 to cover most users, and then make the transition easier for people from migrating from Vue 2 to 3 in the future. So it's kind of like the set theory mindset that we talked about last year. And so I started to contribute the Vue composition API plugin, and to make sure its behaviors align with Vue 3. This project later got into Vue team, and also later I come out with a library called Vue Demi to unify the difference between Vue 2 and 3. So as I joined the Vue team, I started to dig in deeper into the composition API and the reactivity system. this got me to create a Vue reactivity experience and reactive Vue that runs views in React, and which is like at the times I have been trapped to use React, and so I do this. And then Vite comes out, and I starting to trying the new build tools with Vue 3, and make the icon explorer called Icons. It's my first app built on top of Vite, and from that starting point, I found there's so many things missing in Vite because it's very young. So I built Vite PWA with a bunch of plugins like auto imports, components, auto imports, components, and icons. And since I work a lot with icons, I starting to evolve with the idea of Iconify project, combining with the experience of VS Code. When I'm making the VS Code I18 Alley, I made Iconify IntelliSense to display the icons inside our code editor. And from the work on Vite plugins, I made Vite plugin inspect to see the internal of Vite pipeline and help myself to debug. Combining all the explorations of the Vite ecosystem, I extract them into a template called Vite, which somehow becomes quite popular. On top of that, I also made a variation called Vite Web Extension for browser extension, and a small library for it. While Vite becomes more and more popular, more mature, I started to migrate my blog site to Vite. Along the way, I also made a Vite plugin to compiling Markdown, and Vite SSG for static site generator. Was a coincidence of the previous examples. And when it comes to styling, I find the project called Windy CSS, which is more like an on-demand version of Tailwind, and I started to contributing it and build a plugin for it. And at that time, I have to prepare the talk about Vue. And as a side product of my investigation, I made SlideDiff, the slides maker that you are looking at right now. And from SlideDiff, I also make Draw for drawing on the slides, and Browse for taking beautiful screenshots. Then with the experience I got with Windy CSS, I made Uno CSS, an atomic CSS engine that is highly extensible. Combining with Iconify, I come out with the pure CSS icon solution, which I think is probably one of the best approach for icons today. And from my work of Vite, I got invited to work on Nuxt. From my work at Nuxt, I made unplugging to allow plugins to support both Vite and Webpack easily, so we don't need to write twice for each bundler. And then unimport to unify auto-import usages. And to improve Nuxt SSR experience in development, Puya and I come up with the CSS runtime for Vite that later becomes ViteNode. And having the foundation of ViteNode, it makes Vitest possible. And when making Vitest, we need a way to communicate between the worker thread and the main thread. So then I come up with the project with a library called BIRPC, a remote procedural call to handle that. And with the foundation work of Vite plugins and inspect and BIRPC, I started to work on Nuxt DevTools and to present you the internals of your Nuxt app and to help you to understanding it better. And then we have Magic Cast to write changes back to your tsconfig file. And also we built Elk, the Mastodon client with Nuxt. And then the Nuxt playground, learn.nuxt.com, which you see in the workshop early this day. Yeah, I hope it's not too much. So among all these projects, highlighting code becomes tricky to do right. So I started to working on improving Shiki, end up completely rewriting it. From it, I'm also made Shiki Magic Move, Shiki Monanko, 2/ integrations, etc. And when I somehow get trapped into the ESLint ecosystem, I started to take over the ESLint stylistic project and made the configure inspector, which later becomes official, and a lot small utilities. All this experience I got working on them later be utilized to make the Nuxt ESLint module possible. Oh, so you can see. Thank you. Yeah, you can see I really down to a rabbit hole, super deep. And yeah, so I hope my experience can give you some inspirations. So I would say it's like each person has his own strengths and interests. And the birth of many projects have a certain timelines of randomness. Everyone's journey of growth and the Yak Shaving map will certainly be different. So I'm also very looking forward to see your version of this Yak map. Okay, yeah. So before we call it a day, I'd like to reiterate the expectations on open source project. While open source is a broad topic, different people might have different interpretation and expectations of open source. However, I believe that open source is about giving. I think everyone has its own motivation and goals for participants in open source. It could be improving our skills, or find a better job opportunities, or simply to make world a better place. So among other reasons, open source is a diverse community, and all these motivations are valid. However, different motivation can lead to different expectations of open source. So here I want to talk about like how we can adjusting our expectations of open source, which can help us better integrating into the community and enjoying the benefit of open source. I think that open source projects are gifts. When we use someone else's open source project, it's like receiving a free lunch from a stranger. And when we contributing to open source, it's like giving a gift, a gesture of our heart. And when you give a gift, you may often receive something in your return. But that shouldn't be our main goals of giving out. For me, the process of open source itself is the goal. I enjoy sharing and working together with the others to solving the problems. And when you stop focusing on the rewards, you will enjoy the process more. And in the long run, you may receive more, even more, and just like how I'm grateful to have the opportunity to stand here and to share my thoughts with all of you today, thanks to open source. Open source is not just about code, it's about community, a culture, a spirit. And when you become part of the community, you will meet a group of generous and helpful people. They will appreciate your contributions and will receive gratitude and assistance from many others. I believe the spirit of mutual support is the core of open source. So if you have a deeper interest in this topic, I would recommend you to read those articles. The PDF of slides can be found on my website, and you can link to it. And hopefully, I hope everyone can find their own place in open source community and enjoying the process. So I wish you find your best in your open source journey and happy hacking. お疲れ様でした。ありがとうございます。